Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation, based loosely on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what this podcast is all about. I'm your host, Doug Gardam, and today I welcome back, but first time on video, Christiane Banks. Christiane, how are you?
I'm good, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm better now that we're now talking.
That's marvelous, and it's really nice to see you.
Oh, likewise.
And thank you for inviting me today.
Oh, it's a little overdue from the first time we talked when we did the audio. So Christiane is an author. I met Christiane first while we were doing I'll call it the Ontario book signing circuit. So Christiane is still very active in that and doing those things, but also she's I'll say a professional therapeutic beautician. And so she has kind of a special calling here where she'll go in and help people kind of take care of some of the things that we all have to take care of, like our hair and our feet, for those that can't get out. And it's knowing it with my own parents, it is a real issue because you like to feel good in and how you're kind of prepared. And everyone likes to have their hair done properly sometimes, some of the things with your skin, and likewise feet. And so I've kind of learned this about Christiane, and it's very interesting because I think she pulls some of her work in those discussions with people. And her most recent book, Catch a Falling Star, is a book about true story book about some of those, I'll say, stories that she's learned over the years, which if you haven't read it, I encourage you to go out and get it. Because I was going to say, it has this touch that Christiane has in being able to bring a real emotional quality to what she's talking about and who she's writing about. So with that, Christiane, I hope that's pretty accurate.
Oh, wonderful. It's very accurate.
She's also like myself. She's a grandparent, and she does travel a little bit too. But I was going to say I had kind of left the book signing after the pandemic hit us because it shut down everything. It almost seems like a distant memory now, amazingly in that sense. But Christiane's gone back in and is doing it in the Indigo bookstores here in Canada. And how have you found it in I'll say since really the pandemic and coming back, because they said it's kind of cool to see you out there. You advertise on Instagram,
Yeah.
and how are you? Like, you're still like, first of all, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of a courageous act because it's not always easy to go out and talk about your work, but then to do it in front of people in a bookstore. And I can relate to this because I've done it. And it's like one
Yeah.
of those things that you just step out and do. And so how are you kind of in that world today? Because I think you've got one coming up, right?
Yes, I do. Christmas or the holiday season historically quite busy with book events. So the next, several weekends, I actually have about 7 of them. So so Indigo very kindly allow us to come in and promote and talk about our work,
Yeah.
especially if you're well established, which I am.
Well, they know you too. Well, I mean, I've always thought like one of the things that kind of encouraged me was around when you go to an art show and you get a chance to talk to the artists of the pictures that you see on the wall. It just, whether you like it or not, it gives almost more of a three-dimensional feel, I call it. Goes from that
Yeah,
2D that's on the wall to like it becomes real and living almost.
yeah, comes
And
alive.
and
Yeah,
this is like if you go out to a bookstore and you see Christiane there, like go and talk to her because you'll find that the stories become alive as she starts to explain her work and where it came from and how you actually sit down and do that.
yeah, and connections, that you would not expect.
Oh yeah.
Always somebody has a story to tell you if they do approach you. And as you sort of break down the barriers, the connections that come and the camaraderie, it's fascinating. I mean, every week there's a story to share about someone who showed up, and we either knew the same place
Oh
or,
yeah.
you know the same people, or they're from the same place, or where I was originally from in England, in Newcastle. I meet all sorts of English people, of course, and but just that because the books I have on the table that I work on, I have three books that I
Yes,
promote,
yes. Yeah, I
and
just mentioned your most recent. You have two previous ones to
yes,
that.
that too. I have Amelia's Prayer and Amazing Grace. Amelia's Prayer is my debut novel.
Right, right.
Amazing Grace is the sequel. But just because you were talking to me about coming across and
Yeah.
how people talking about art and how things come alive. So I don't have it with me actually. It's in the car, but the cover of my first book, Amelia's Prayer. Can I
Yes.
hold it
Yep.
up and so
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
I
No.
just want to explain something? So this lovely photograph here,
Yes.
right? I
Yep.
have that beautiful photograph framed and on my table. And
Oh,
again,
cool.
if you look at it, it what I want to explain about is how much it does for me without me realizing it was going to. So that photograph for me encompasses this story, and it's a story about a couple who meet during the Second World War, right?
Amazing time.
So it has it there's so many people that happen to where
Oh
they
yeah.
met
Yeah.
because of that war. So I won't get off track. I want to stay on track about this photograph. Otherwise, I'll go off someplace. I need to stay here. So this photograph, I have it framed and on the table beside the books. And the amount of people who stop and look at the photograph, stop and look at it, and come back, right? Come
Yes.
back.
Yeah.
So come back and look again and look at me because often, and I know you'll agree to this or contest to it if you like. People don't even see you. They just kind of walk. They're not. It's not that they don't see you, but they're thinking about something else and they're walking
Hmm.
on or walking to get what they need. This picture stops people in their tracks. Almost every book event, I'm asked about this photograph that's framed on
Amazing.
the table. Now, what's wonderful about it is, first of all, they want to know if I know who they are. Do you
That's the
know
first
these people?
question.
Yeah. Do you know
Yeah.
these people? Because the picture itself is very glamorous, and I think it's a glamorous era. This era,
Yes.
very glamorous. They look attractive. You know, they just knew how to take a lovely black and white photograph, and there's something very mysterious about that photograph. And what I say to everyone is, yes, I do know them, and they say to me because my grandma has one like that. My aunt, my uncle, my mum and dad. I've got one of my mum and dad on the piano. So the people who identify with this, and then they want to tell me all about who they were, how they met, why they met,
Oh my
and
goodness.
and then they stop and ask again, "Do you know these people?" And then I say, well, yes, actually, it's my mum and dad, but it's a photograph that I found very accidentally, but perfect for the front of this book and that
Okay.
story. So it's a long kind of explanation, but you can see how just that photograph,
Oh.
and they come and they talk to you about, and they'll cry, oh, because my grand, he never came back, and and
Oh yeah,
you get these
that's
stories, just overflowing from people. It's really actually an absolute privilege and
good word.
a humbling, joyful experience to listen to these stories.
Oh, I can
That
imagine.
is the best side of being out there,
Yes,
working, standing there, listening, waiting, reaching out, and telling your story. But a lot of the time, I am listening. I am being told their story, and they so want to share it, And don't. What's marvelous is sometimes they're surprised themselves. They didn't know they wanted to do that.
it's interesting because your book and even how you probably present it prompts that type of thing. And I mean, we're actually at the time of the year too, with November 11th just
Yeah,
passed, right?
just gone.
And it was a part of like really the world hasn't been there since, like a good thing, but what many families, I would say, were affected by it, with missing loved ones, but also, as you mentioned, those that didn't come back, which like many families have that story too, right? And it's hard for us to even imagine that in our world today. Like it's
Our
just
our generation, for sure. Well, certainly, we are. So, what I say, and you're right. And when people do stop and talk about, particularly Amelia's prayer, because of the picture, it's the realization that my generation. So I was born after the war,
right,
after the end of the Second World War. My generation, as we disappear, are the last generation who've heard these stories
right,
firsthand,
yep,
unless you had a grandfather or something who could tell you. And we've heard, and I've actually heard, because I'm old enough, and because I have talked to men who were in the First World War
wow. There's not many
at
left.
Vimy Ridge,
Oh,
and I've heard firsthand. And so one of these gentlemen was. I used to work on the chronic floor of a hospital. I think I might have told you as we talked last time, but uh, doing the same kind of thing. That's how I ended up doing kind of therapeutic hairdressing. But
okay.
this gentleman was sick. He was palliative. He was in hospital. He was 97, and he needed his hair cut. And he was in the chair, and I was cutting his hair. It was very quiet, and I just sort of gently chatted and talked to him. And through the conversation, he said he had been gassed.
Oh,
So his lungs were bad. He was dying of cancer, but he had been poison gassed. He was at Vimy Ridge, Canadians. And he talked to me as if I wasn't there. So he talked into the air, into space, just letting out what he needed to say, which was, they were massacred, really. They came home wrecked
oh,
and destroyed if they did come home.
yeah,
And, how many Canadians, he
there
talked
were.
about the
Yes,
Canadian. So, the stories that, as I said, so you can understand why I use the word privilege.
yeah, yeah. No, it's to me, Christiane. That's a perfect word. Like it
Yeah.
is. It's hard to even get a sense of it because I even like I had family. I actually really never knew my grandfathers, but my both grandfathers didn't serve. Well, one went and cleaned up at one of the concentration camps. He was a medic that went over. He volunteered
Oh,
and went over
right.
there and came back. And I mean, many of them. I had an uncle who was on the line, and many of them, as you're describing this gentleman that was 97, I think they saw things that humans really aren't supposed to see. And then they come back to try and
Survive.
live in this normalcy of the Western world. And it's a really it's one of those things, I think, that you do your best, but it's almost you can't fix it. Like, you
Yeah.
just have to learn how to live with it. This brings me actually to popping in all the different things. So I recently was hearing Alistair McGrath talk about C.S. Lewis. He's a biographer of C.S.
Yeah.
Lewis.
Yes.
And he was talking about suffering. And he said one of the things that they talked about in the discussion was we want to eliminate suffering, right? This is the whole almost kind of goal in present society, right? You're happy all the time and no one suffers. Like, that's kind of almost the thing. And he says, rather than trying to eliminate it, and Lewis did this in his two books, right? He intellectually discussed pain and suffering, and then he experienced it with the death of his wife, Joy.
Yes. Yeah.
And they were very different books. I wish I could tell you that I've read them. I've only kind of talked about them. I haven't actually
Yes.
read them.
Yeah. There's a
But
movie, isn't there, of one of
yes,
them?
yes. And they were saying about, and this is, to me, kind of fits into what we're talking about, in the sense that it's difficult, but how do we find ways to better deal with suffering? Then you can eliminate it because it's part of the human experience, whether we like it or not. And I'm not encouraging it by saying that. I'm just saying that it's part of what we have to go with. And do we have tools to, and I think we are broaching it with a lot of the counseling and the things that we're learning about PTSD and things like that, mental illness. But it's been a long time to kind of get there, rather than you come back here, you've seen things you're not really supposed to see, and, well, just suck it up. That was kind of the thing, right? Just don't do it. So
Don't
it's
talk
like,
about it.
so you would hear all kinds of these stories, right? Like
I
this
do.
this
Hmm.
gentleman that you were talking about, who was 97, and you talked about this in our previous podcast. Some of the different people that you would work with and the stories they would tell you were just true, fascinating stories. And now you're experiencing this all over again in book events.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, it's a great kind of segue into what you're saying, because you're saying, how do we help people who suffer? How do we help suffering? Often
Yes.
we don't know we're suffering. People don't
No.
know. We don't stop to find out if they're suffering. But you go to a book event or you sit and listen to somebody just for 5 minutes, you'll hear what they're feeling.
Hmm.
And I think the answer to the part of the answer to your question. So, Mr. Thompson, who's the name of the man I talked to who was at
Oh,
Brimley Ridge, who's well long passed away now. So let's give him the name I knew. Then I
yes.
never saw him again, but I do think about him a lot.
Oh, wow.
Mr. Thompson, I believe, was that brave generation who didn't. They came back damaged, as he said, damaged. They were physically damaged because of the poison gas,
Yes.
but they were mentally
Oh,
hurt.
oh, yeah.
You maybe couldn't see the scars, but you know, the
They were
scars
there.
were there and they were deep, and they went a long way. And I think what happened with Mr. Thompson, as I talked to him, I think I've explained this to you too before, as a non-person who
Okay.
wants to listen. So
Yes.
I'm a non-threatening person in that I'm not
Yes.
a sister-in-law, cousin, daughter, son. I'm a person who wants to listen, but
You give that safe space,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
That safe space where you can say really what you want. And I think also he was dying. He was definitely not, he was palliative and he wasn't, there was nothing more to hide or,
Mm,
so he was, again, that's where sometimes you're really in a privileged place to hear the stories that old people want to share.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting too, like when you think of what he would have seen in almost 100 years, right? Like, it's just what keeps that going to, like, you've been in a world war, you survive that, which is almost a miracle in itself. And then you kind of live on and you just like, how does that work? Like, we don't know the answers to those questions, but
Well, I think the minuscule example of that might be in our generation was COVID, possibly. You know, it is slightly minuscule where you know, there were moments where we really didn't know what was happening
right,
next. It
right.
wasn't quite the same, but you know, what we knew as life was threatened,
Yes,
and
yes.
we couldn't see what was threatening. And it wasn't like going out to war, or, you know, it was a form of war. But I think the human spirit just, you know, gets up and moves on when it's backs against the wall. You have two choices: you do or you don't. But I don't think that certainly doesn't, you know, answer the question to how do we actually really survive
We
something
have
like
this
this.
incredible ability to almost adapt to almost anything, it seems, right?
Yeah, we do.
And
Yeah,
what the saying goes, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger."
yeah, yeah.
There's some real reality to that. So when you kind of when you're at these your book events now, so you're in one. So what's this? The 13th today. This will probably air in 2 weeks. So you'll be in bookstores the last weekend in November, right?
Yes, 23rd, 24th. So I'm 23rd, 24th, and the 30th. So
Where are you on the 30th?
Milton. I'm actually
Milton?
going into my home store.
So there's
Yes.
a shout out to right now is go out to Indigo Milton and meet Chrisanne and her books on Saturday, November 30th.
Yes.
Okay, because this will come out before then. So
Thank you.
that'll
Yeah,
be kind of a cool thing to do.
that's good. Thank you, Doug.
So these stories really bring kind of an attraction to your books, like because with you talking about this photograph of your parents
Yes,
that
yes.
captures people, and now they get a chance to kind of go back and re-experience that era, right?
Yeah. Just through a moment and conversation. So, some people do a lot more. They buy the book, or they take a picture, or they take a picture with me in the picture. You know, it seems kind of it's a bit magical, actually. I mean, it's
Yes.
interesting that it is my parents, but I had no idea it would do anything like that. I should have, I suppose, but last weekend, just out of interest, you know, a remembrance sort of
Right.
weekend.
Yes. Yeah. Hmm.
Well, traditionally, I go to Guelph because of
Okay.
John McCrae and the poppies on the book. So that weekend always is an interesting weekend because we do a sort of remembrance day display around the books.
Oh, cool.
And, you know, because a lot of people know and a lot of people don't know. So, you know, you end up
Yes.
telling the story about John McCrae. So one thing, you know, follows the other. It's really interesting.
Oh, I'll bet.
Like this podcast.
Well, it's funny because it hadn't really occurred to me that your story is very much connected with this November 11th
Oh
memorial
yeah. Mhm.
for Remembrance Day, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
in many ways, it's like disagree or agree with what's kind of going on, and the shall we say the ceremonies that go on. It's still a pretty important part of our history, right? As coming through that and
Yeah.
trying to, and that's why I point to your book because it it doesn't seem to me very many Canadians were not impacted by events that happened, like either members going overseas, because that was like, I mean, to fly to England today, you do it kind of like in 5 hours, right? It's like a five
Yes.
to six
Yeah.
hours.
Yeah.
It's just like
What flight do you use?
you want on it.
That I want to know. I want a 5 hour flight to England.
I'm thinking of
Sorry.
Vancouver to Toronto, I
Yeah,
think is
no,
what I'm thinking of.
my geography's off.
But like flying is like not what it, like I kind of try to go back to like the early 40s when like going overseas was like going to like another planet
Oh
almost,
gosh,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Like it's really, like I think about, even I went to, look, grew up in Toronto, and to go to school I went to Carleton, and I can remember, which is in Ottawa, which is basically a 4 to 5 hour drive from Toronto. And when that happened, that was like the other side of the world.
Hmm.
Like to me, when that was going on
Yeah,
and growing up, and like within like my lifetime, that's become like not far away at all. Like
I
it's
know.
just,
Yeah,
it's amazing
how
to me.
technology has changed things in is I often talk about when I first emigrated 45 years ago. When I first came to Canada, getting a phone call if it wasn't
Yes,
Christmas or your
yes,
birthday
yes,
was
yes,
terrifying because it was just definitely bad news.
yep,
And the cost and how long you could talk, and now how we're so instant, you know.
yes.
It's so hard to explain this to kids today with the instant, you know,
Oh,
immediate
everything.
gratification response to everything. Very, very different. And
It's
that's
it's
what I was saying, you know,
it's even with,
communication,
oh,
travel.
when you think of, like, this is what we were talking about before, and even books, like the availability to get a hold of a book, you can go to your computer and get it literally instantly.
Immediately. Hmm.
And it's not getting worse, it's getting better, right? Like it's
Yes.
like it's kind of an amazing thing of how that fits. I think of it, and books haven't got to this point, but I think of it like music with things like Spotify. Like it's hard to believe, like if you go back 30 years, we were still listening to like CDs, right?
Yeah.
And you'd buy a CD at a store that was like $15, and now today, less than that, you can listen to instantly almost anything that's ever been recorded. it's
Anything that's out there, really. You're right.
it's
Yeah.
astounding, like how that. And I sometimes wonder, with that instant access, does that change something? Like, does that change how we view, like I can remember waiting for that new album to come out, as an example, or we were part of Book of the Month Club. So every month a new book would come out, and how anxious I'd be to come home and get it from the mail. And what was it going to be? And that isn't here anymore.
No, it
Like,
isn't. And I think we and maybe what you've never if you what for us we lived through that, but what these young people have never really lived through that. They've always been able to get things immediately.
mhm,
But I think you miss that the joy of the anticipation. It's like looking forward to a holiday or looking forward to going to
yes.
a concert, or you know, there's something about the anticipation and the joy of waiting for it that really enhances the experience of the experience, don't you
We,
think?
to me, it's an odd kind of sensibility that we have now, right? And so I think of today, like, so I was recently going through this because I was commenting on, there's always things talked about with our healthcare and doctor and access and all this stuff. It's quite a, like, in the media we broadcast this as quite a crisis almost, right? The access to get an MRI or anything like that
Yeah,
is. And I went back and I looked at like the Hippocratic oath that a doctor has to take, and I looked at what it kind of says about sustaining life and trying to avoid pain. I'm paraphrasing, but these are the things that, like, the oath that they swear in becoming a doctor. And then I went back. I, like, our grandson, when he was born last year, he had 7 of 8 great grandparents.
good Lord.
7 of 8.
Now there's a sign of the times.
When I was born, My maternal grandfather died like 2 months after I was born, and within before I was four, my paternal grandfather. So I really never even knew them because they lived. My paternal grandfather lived on the coast, and so I might have met him once, but I think my memory is more of black and white photographs that I've seen subsequently than
Exactly. Yeah.
actually seeing it. And so I looked into it, and our life expectancy went from 73 years to 82 today.
Yeah.
50 up 15% in
That's
like
fantastic.
60
Yeah.
years. Well, then doctors are doing something right.
Yeah. I think I think it's easy sometimes to forget, especially, after COVID, because this fallout from COVID has, you know,
Oh,
COVID's fingers continue to touch us
yeah, no
and will
kidding.
do so for a long, long time.
Yes.
Um, and I think it's sort of dulled some of the great improvements in healthcare just by what you have said in that short space of time that your young grandson
Yes.
has seven of his eight grandparents. I mean, it's unheard of, you know, really, it was. And certainly back in my day, you know, people were old when they were 50, you
Well,
know.
I was going to say, there you go. Like that part seems to have just shifted enormously from.
And also talking about that, even as I'm doing research on the Irish right now because it's for another book, um, but
That's a
it's
question coming.
yes, it's coming. But what I wanted to talk about was child mortality. You
Oh,
know, how many children didn't last till they didn't last
yes.
their first year, and I have a maternal grandmother like you. I knew none of them,
Okay.
right? My mother and father didn't know theirs either. So
Yep.
so when I hold grandchildren now, I feel again
That privilege, right?
absolutely touched by a great privilege. And but what I wanted to say. So my grandmother had 12 children, but by the time she was 28, she'd had 5 children, four of which she buried.
Oh
Buried.
my
Didn't
goodness.
weren't stillborn or died at birth.
This
So
is your grandmother.
my grandmother,
Wow.
she buried four of these children, all in childhood, and that was not unusual.
No, because I mean
So
that was
if
part of
you
having a
just
large
look at that,
family.
exactly, yeah, just and that's why they did, because a lot of them didn't survive, right? Really hard though on the you think about the parent, the mother, the bearing of them,
Well,
and that's just my grandmother. We're just talking about my grandmother, and I think it becomes a lot more profound to
yes.
me, that story. Now I am, when you
Yes.
are a grandmother, and
Yep.
you
It changes
think,
the
well,
experience.
this is, yeah, it certainly does. So, yeah, there's a lot of wonderful things have improved, and I think and sometimes it's easy to sort of think, well, I
Yes.
have to wait 6 months for an MRI, or what's this doctor doing? But still, ultimately, we have to believe and trust everybody's doing their best.
Well, you just brought a really key, and I think this I heard from Brené Brown, but there are people that really think people aren't trying to do their best. And I actually think that is so rare, is almost to be untrue.
Yeah,
That it may not appear like I'm trying to do my best, but you don't know what my story and what I'm doing are. And just to keep my head above water is almost beyond being able to go out and open the door for you at a McDonald's store. Like I forget my manners. Like it's just like
yeah,
nobody cares anymore. Like I can even catch myself saying that often because
me too.
you kind of go into a grocery store and it's like, and I kind of go, but you forget, right? That like like who's not trying? Like it's almost wonder. And that's why I thought it was an interesting pause in my own thinking was like, do you really think they're going out of their way not to try their best to do what they're trying to do, right?
Well, I think we personalize it and think it's, what's going on here, what's wrong. You think it's you or you've caused
Yes.
it. And in fact, it's not. People are just really got their own stuff going on.
And it's
And
and it, when you said about the medicine, like that was like you think that's only a couple of generations, and today it's almost unheard of to
yeah,
lose children, right?
thank
Like it's
goodness.
just
Hmm.
such a shock to when you hear about, well, if you hear about anybody, let alone anybody you're connected with, it's just to me, it's one of those stunning things that's really, really changed.
Hmm. To me, it is too. It's massive, huge quantum leaps in a very short time.
Oh, I mean, my goodness. And then I think of like you were talking about the experience of becoming a grandparent, right? And I can remember prior to my experience, like I would hear people talk about becoming a grandparent, and it's like you're kind of going like, really, like, is that really kind of? And then when it happens, it's like you just suddenly like morph into another world. Like I've been very, because when we had our first episode, it was fairly recent that I had become a grandparent,
Yes.
and it was like I was just quite amazed. Like I think I might have said in the thing, I was so much amazed because I wasn't actually in when our daughter gave birth. I mean, obviously, I think that was the appropriate thing not to be there as the father. My wife was, and it was a spectacular event in her life. But like literally 20 minutes after he was born, I got to hold him, and then I
Oh,
also got to see my daughter.
yeah.
And you can even talk about. It's funny how these rabbit holes we go down as we discuss this. But when the transformation in our daughter was, I think, the most stunning thing because after the baby was born, it was like she was instantly a mother. Like it was just she was still our child, obviously our daughter, but her mother instincts were it was a transformation. Like I don't know
Yeah.
how else to explain it. And I don't know how you actually this is I come back to the C.S. Lewis where he intellectually spoke about pain and then he experienced enormous pain and they were not the same. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting how our life goes, right?
Yes, I know.
Which
Cyclical
comes
for
back to
sure.
your books, I think, because you're able to actually articulate those feelings that I think bring that about in people's hearts. Like they've gone through this.
Yeah, because I'm privileged to be in a space and a place when they share it with me or have shared it with me, and I have or did have a good memory. Not as good as it used to be. So yeah, and I'm able to express those feelings within stories which are universal. And you
Yes.
understand that when you're out there, that we are all the same.
Well, I often think it's funny because at our in our true sense, we are emotional beings. Like that's what we are. That's what makes us kind of special, right? And yet, much of our material world, we almost deny that, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not making emotional decisions. I researched this, and I'm actually making a real decision, and it's like, yeah, but you're still after all the work you did to come up with that decision as an example, it still makes you feel good that you actually did the work to get to that to
Yes, to
that
get to that
decision,
point.
right?
Yes, yeah,
It's
yeah,
still a feeling inside you that I did the right work to right calculations. I used to have this argument a lot in the engineering world. That's why I say that. Because in the science side, you're constantly doing research and doing effort, which is great, especially that they keep airplanes in the air. The science is great to have that, but it's still like have we done enough to make sure that that's a completely safe aircraft, as an example, right? You're constantly going to that level. So,
Yes. Hmm.
and I think your books probably capture that in many ways.
I was just
What?
thinking, I was just, forgive me, just thinking about your engineering, and your comments about, crafts and books in your books. And I know, you as an author, do you find that when you're writing, it's really hard to actually believe you've done everything you can to make that book what it needs to be?
Don't, didn't you feel like you kind of get to a point where you've done everything you can? The Clancy quote used to keep, I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but he said the difference between fiction and nonfiction, Tom Clancy, was that fiction had to be believable. And I always
Right.
thought it was a bit of an ironic thing because it's
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
like, but if it's nonfiction, you can believe almost anything. And often many stories in nonfiction, which is what makes them popular, is they are unbelievable feats.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. I
And if you
mean,
wrote it as fiction, people wouldn't believe that could take place. And I
yeah.
always thought that was kind of real. And so, to your question, um, it it was a lot of effort because I'm also very things have to fit together for me.
Yes, that's the engineering part of you.
Yes, and I think that transferred into what I was writing about. Like when you're going through that, then to get to that point, something has to make sense in order for that to take place.
Yeah,
And that was a constant. Like it just never seems to go away.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, I just wondered about it. Thank you for answering that.
Well, it's to me, it's one of those things that in a lot of the writing I've been doing in the Substack is very nonfiction, and um, it's spending. I found that I'm I'm learning as I write. Like when I'm trying to figure something out, often that comes through my writing.
Yes,
Like I find it really weird that it's like that, but it's
yeah,
like
it is, isn't it? It's yeah, I understand that because yeah, it's almost sometimes a bit mystical, isn't it? That
oh I was going to say it's
I mean, you
it's
know what
very
I'm. It's
yeah no
very
it's it's like you throw it out there and then something comes back. Like it's one of those like when you're struggling as with an example as like struggling with a sentence or an idea or trying to put something in a proper kind of call it structure of what your story's about, you get stuck. If I can remember this, I would often just stand up and walk away. Not that I wouldn't come back shortly, but that it just was that shift
yeah,
that enabled you to come back and finish
yeah,
that thought.
yeah.
But if I stayed there pounding my head against the screen,
That's worse. You think, oh my God. It's true. Just
so
get up and walk or something. Yeah. Hmm.
you said you mentioned what you're working on. So like you're so I'm gonna twofold here. Your first two books, Amelia's Prayer and Amazing Grace, are books,
Yes, novels. Well, historical family sagas, novels
and
with,
they're true stories based on it's
yes,
a
yes,
true books like
yes,
about your thing.
yes,
What prompted you to write Catch Your Falling Star? Because it's more a collection of shorter stories,
yes,
right?
yes.
Like what drove you to do that?
Well, it's a terrific question because it is, it's a bit of a long answer. However, Catch Your Falling Star is a book of short, spirited short stories, is how we've got on the front of the book. The idea behind the title is the first story as well, which is dancing with my father when I was 4 and
Okay.
standing on his feet,
Yes, yes.
and he moved me around to the song Perry Como sang. Catch Your Falling Star.
Oh, okay, okay.
And it's an early memory and a wonderful one because Dad would dance and we'd play. And because I loved Perry Como for some reason, still do. But at this young age, I liked him so much. Dad went out and got this little EP, or
Yep.
and put it on the old stereo that was like as big as
Yes.
as big as a house, and played it for me because he enjoyed watching me listen to it, right?
Ah,
And
okay,
we
okay.
danced to this, and as the story finished, Dad would put the stars in his pocket, and say they're in there for later. And like it's just a
Oh, wow.
beautiful memory that I
Oh, yeah.
remember, and it's a universal. This is what I mean by universal.
Yes. Yeah.
How many people will remember doing that? Something like that, where Dad put something behind his ear or put something somewhere that really wasn't there, but you believed it was. So the title, it's part of the story as well. So the title actually, and the introduction tells you that it gives you that story and shares it with you. It's a preface. The idea behind the title is that all of these stories are stars, as far as I'm concerned, because I
Mm.
have again been privileged to hear them,
Yes.
and I have been in a place where I've had that ability to keep them and save them and often repeat them to different people at
S-
different times
So were these written down, or you've kept them in your memory? That's
in my
amazing to
memory.
amazing to me.
So I got panicky a couple of years ago and thought, because some
Yes.
people would say to me, when I've told the story, and I think I've said to you also, and I say it to everybody, I know I'm an author, but I believe I'm a storyteller,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes. Yep.
A storyteller. And these stories come to me, and they change. They don't change that much, but they do change a bit, and as you tell them over the years. But the important part, the core and the center of it, is still the same message. And
Yes.
people would say to me, if I tell this story, sometime go to England, or I'm out with the girls, or it's Christmas here, and I'll tell a story, and they say, "Oh, tell me a story about such and such," because they can't actually. It's like reading a book, right?
Yes.
You
Yes.
read a book, a great book, and I say, "Well, but you can't really remember what it was about." You can, but not
Yes.
not verbatim. So they know the story made them feel good. No want to hear it again, right? So, oh, tell that story again, would you? Oh, tell us that story about this or that or the other. And eventually, someone did say, more than one person, you really should write these down,
No,
right?
for sure. Because you've said a couple things here that I can't help but kind of remark on. So when you talked about the story of Catch a Falling Star, you said about dancing on and you being on your father's feet and standing on it. Like I go like, what father hasn't done that with their
I
daughter?
know.
Like it's one of those things, and you don't. It's not doesn't last very long, right?
No, I know.
Because they grow up,
I
and it's
know.
like. But I thought like, wow, that's a magical moment that immediately comes to my mind. The other thing you said, which I think is so interesting, is when people say, "Oh, I really love that story." But if you go further and say, well, what did you like about it? There's no answer.
Yeah.
And I find it's very, I don't know what it is and whether it's always been there, but it's like, because we've always been a big movie family. We like movies, right? And so we have this thing, Quentin Tarantino, the movie director, once said, if you talk about a movie for 20 minutes after you've seen it, it's a good movie. Whether you like it or not, it's still a good movie. And so I think we've learned how to do this. But when I hear it from other people, it's like, well, what did you like about it? And it's a bridge because it's not usually just, well, there was a scene they did this. It's like sometimes we'll start to go and tell what the movie's about scene by scene, which becomes very boring very quickly.
Yeah.
And no one can actually do what you just said, but you can. Like that's a kind of a neat thing that like, well, why is that message a good one? Why did you think that was such a great story? And it's like, because it made me feel good, but you can't really find out what it's about. It's just like, and then you had friends that said, you better write these down,
Yeah.
Christiane. And you did.
Yes. And I did, because it was important, not just not just because that it reaches out and touches people, but the stories in Falling Star that are just priceless, and not they're not my stories. I just happened to be there and hear
Yes.
them, and I am the storyteller. So I've been given whatever it is we're given, the ability to sit down and share these stories. So, and they're different, they're varied, they're poignant, they're,
Oh, that's
they're,
cool.
they're simple, and they really are beautiful. And there's not enough of that around
No,
these
no.
days, and
When you
people
said,
need it.
oh, we all need stories more than we even know we need them. Um, More than Instagram stories that are like 10
I
seconds
know.
long. But when you said that, are they all of the same era or are they
No, no,
varying eras?
no, no. They're varied. They're
Oh, cool.
different. They're just so unique. They're universal, unique as the people who are involved in them.
And you said there's two stories included in it that are fictional, and the one you
Yes,
mentioned
they're
was the
fables.
cross.
So they're
The
called
fables. No, you
the
said fables. Yes.
fables.
Way
Yeah.
better. Way better term.
Fable. I like the word fable. That's one of them, and I can't remember what the other is. I'll have to look at the still. That's my
So
own book too.
what prompted you? So you've got a lot of these stories that you've remembered from different people that you've met over the years. What prompted you to put in a fable in the book?
Because I liked it. It's a great question, isn't it? I liked it and it resonated with me. Well, yes, I know what the other one is now. It's called Jimmy Fairy Dust, and I like that one too. So there's two stories that, even though we know as we're reading them, we know that, and I say at the beginning, they're not true stories, but as you're reading them, they're moving you and touching you and reaching out to you with a message. And it's still believable. It's
Ah,
very
okay.
believable because ultimately the end of it is the truth. It's what we all feel at the end of this story. They're short enough that I could probably read them to you if you want. They're both very short too. But
Do they connect with the other stories in the book too?
mm,
No, that wasn't your intention.
not really. No, they're just random stories. Two of them that I happen to really love, and I'll explain why I'm writing them down.
Oh, okay.
Just because Jimmy Fairy Dust. It's a wonderful story, and I say fairy dust because it's like somebody sprinkled fairy dust on something just because of the end of it. And that's one of the stories people will say, "Oh, tell us the Jimmy story." That's the one that isn't real, you know. So it's a bit like a fairy tale. But it's tender enough that you want to hear it again
Yes.
because it's believable.
So I am going to get you to read something. I didn't actually prepare you for this, but something that comes to your mind while we're talking here, as far as to just to give like the audience a bit of an idea of what your stories or your writing is like, and this might be pretty close to that time, but just kind of keep kind of thinking in that. So, and this was kind of the part of the other question I was going to ask you. So you've gone through writing the novel, the longer works, right? These are with your Amelia's Prayer and Amazing Grace. You write these short stories that came out. Um, Now you're working on a new book that's causing you to do some research. Is it going to be a mixture, or are you kind of like, no, I'm going to go back and do another book?
It's a novel, yeah,
It is,
definitely.
eh?
Yeah, and it's further back. it's sort of connected to Amelia's prayer, only in that Amelia's family is Irish.
Okay, it's
So
not it's not a prequel.
it is a bit of a prequel,
Oh, it
yes.
is. Oh, okay.
Not
Well, that's
yeah, it
exciting.
is because it's about so it's a prequel to Amelia's prayer, and not we are using Amelia's parents and her
Oh, okay.
parents because but very loosely in a way, but because it's becoming you know how they you start something and it sort of goes off in a bit of a
Yes.
different direction. But because of my research, again, I feel it's a story that needs to be told. It's it's a big family historical story,
Okay.
and ostensibly about the Irish famines, but both of them, not just there was
Oh,
two
okay.
Irish famines 100 years apart, just to give us a bit of history again, and instead of the history of, you know how we talk about history and we know millions starved in Ireland, but it's like the war, isn't it? We know thousands perished, but if you pull one person out of that and follow them, right,
Yep.
just somebody who's there on the roadside trying to find food. Uh,
So you've prompted. I want to come back to this, but you've
okay,
prompted another thing to me that I think is intriguing, and I'll say what we hear in the news media and what we experience as in boots in the ground, I'm finding are not the same.
not the same.
And I'm a little surprised that more of us don't, either we don't recognize it or we don't care. But it's fine. I'm finding it very intriguing that the media tells us what our culture is, but yet when I come to boots on the ground, and this is kind of what I'm thinking in your story, because you just said like there were literally millions that were killed during the wars, and as you kind of almost plagues with starvation. But when you go as you do to a boots on the ground store, I call it boots on the ground because it personalizes it. It
It's
becomes real.
grassroots, isn't it? It's what you
Right.
call boots on the ground. Kind of you go to grassroots in any situation, Doug. You're
Yeah.
going to get the truth. I
But
mean, but
it's,
you have to be down there.
and this is what's intriguing with what your story is, because I think Amelia's prayer is also like that. You've
Yes,
got
it
an
is.
experience of a massive thing that happened in the world. And like I hear today, like, well, today we have agendas. The media has an agenda. The media has always had an agenda. That's
Yeah,
like part
yeah,
of what it's
I
about.
know. Yeah,
But then you come down to like, there's a scene. Have you seen Saving Private Ryan?
yes, but oh, very tough movie to watch. Yes,
Oh,
but I
it's a
have.
hugely
Yes,
tough. So
yes,
towards
yes
the
is the
end,
answer.
there's this moment where it's in the country and you can see the car driving up because
He's
when,
coming to his mother. He's coming to the mother of the
yes,
boys, all
that's
the
right.
boys. I
Yes.
sobbed. I knew what you were going to say. Sorry, I had to interrupt.
And the
Forgive
reason
me.
why it's such a magnanimous moment to me, and when I say I don't mean joyful, I mean just
You don't
terror,
forget.
is that you can see the car driving up and they already know what it is, and then the mother falls down.
To her knees. Yeah.
And the reason because you've spent a fair bit of time in this movie with the absolute violence of the on the front war, the brutalized fighting of it, but it's like that massive information about the war. But that one particular moment
Moment.
makes it very like this is you. This is how it affected you.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of these stories are so important because we lose them in the mass media and it's suddenly like it's just you're part of the million, so to speak.
It's
But
just a
no
number
one's
or a statistic
right.
or,
But then you come like as you're saying, and this is the interesting part, like you become, oh my goodness, people had to live with this person that didn't come back, or this person that was, as many will say, they were different people when they came back. Even if they
Yeah,
survived, they were not the same, that person that
yeah,
left. And I think you, whether intentionally or not, grab that in what you're writing about. You get that, like that personalized, this is what it was like. Can you imagine?
yeah. It's what it that's well, it's what it felt like for them, and I think again we are universal, and we all, you and
Yes.
I remember that Private Ryan piece because you don't really want to imagine what
No.
that's like,
No.
but you feel it inside
Oh,
instead of just stats and numbers and boys going off. It brings me just again to a little sort of remembering something. Gary and I, that my husband, went to England for his 50th birthday, and Gary's very interested in history and
okay.
the Air Force. And as part of his 50th birthday celebration for him, we went to the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Britain Museum,
Oh, wow. Okay.
which was, I can't remember where it was, but anyway, it's in London. It's
Yes.
somewhere in London. It might have been in Hendon, I think.
Okay.
So I'm not interested in the aircraft. He is. I'm not. But it was a huge, this very interesting museum set up for that year, for the 50th
Right.
anniversary year, and he was off looking at Lancasters and Spitfires and things that had been pulled up from the sea, and I
Oh,
was
man.
off looking at different things, but so across this big, massive kind of warehouse, it was not like what do you call where we keep aircraft.
Oh,
This is
like a hanger.
can't think of the word. You know what I mean? Hangar,
Yeah.
like a big hangar, but right across the other side of the room, I looked up and noticed a display, and it was a stained glass window. Right, and I thought, now
Oh,
what's a stained glass window doing in here? So off I went to it, have a good look at it. It was beautiful, and it was on loan from a church somewhere in the area. I can't remember the specifics, but I can remember it was on loan from lady. It was a lady, someone who had given it to the church, and the church had lent it to the Battle of Britain display,
oh, wow.
and it was in memory of her four sons
Oh,
lost
man. Oh, man.
in the Air Force. So you're
Wow.
right. It's things like that bring it to grassroots. So you're looking at this big place and the planes and all the numbers and all the people and what they used and the bombs and the survival and the parachutes. But that to me was the story in that stained glass window. I
Well,
still think about that.
that's the part to me that makes it such a human tragedy, right?
Yeah.
It just becomes, I mean, you can't capture them all, but you can feel what that terrible experience must have been like. It's even hard to imagine, actually.
Don't want to. None of us want to go there, but it brings us right back actually to the beginning. If I can just
Yes,
interject
no, for
there,
sure.
which you were asking about Lewis and his talk of sadness.
Yes,
Sadness. How
suffering.
do you survive suffering? How do you survive suffering? How do we get through suffering? And if we think about that and what we started with there, and how somebody survives that kind of suffering, whether it be they've been at the front, they've been in a a plane as it's gone down, or they're a mother or a father who's gone through that.
Hmm.
I wonder if, as we talk about how to survive suffering today,
Yes.
that we, understanding that, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, there's always somebody worse off than you,
Yes.
but I do believe, and there's a lot of talk about this today, and it's gratitude.
Mm.
Gratitude.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So I do believe being grateful, no matter what's going on in your life, for the things you do have, maybe
Hmm.
that helps
Hmm.
a little
Hmm.
bit or puts things in perspective as we look at someone who went through something
Oh,
like that.
yes. Yeah.
Just that little kind of cameo. And and we have talked a lot about the wars, haven't we? And we, I guess, because we've just come through Remembrance Day. I mean, this could have been, that could have been, if we'd been talking last week, but it's very relevant, and it shouldn't be just one day. But but it is, and that's what happens. We move on to the next thing. But I believe you're right. I believe, and there is actually a story in Falling Star that I will read, that I think
Oh,
it's, you were
cool.
saying, think about it, because it's just so poignant, and it works with
Yes.
what we've been talking about.
Well, I think another thing that as us humans struggle with, it might be more than ever, just because of the mass of the mass amount of information that we have around us.
Yeah,
But temporary things are how temporary things are, and I think we really struggle with that. Like, be it
yeah,
sadness or be it happiness, we love the feeling of being happy, but it's a temporary feeling, just like being sad, right? And we have to go through the course of those in a lifetime. That's kind of who we are, right? Like,
that's life. Yes, exactly.
and and that's why I really like the idea of saying, like, how do we, and I think we because my wife works as a counselor, and I think there's more and more tools as we learn more and more about this and ourselves, that we're very good with the material parts, right? Like, if we break our leg, we know how to fix the bone and stuff like that. We are not so good with the, I'll call it the consciousness part of, like, emotion, and how, because the simple idea of just saying we're going to eliminate them, it it's not going to
Yeah,
happen. I
no, of
mean, we've been
course not.
emotional beings since we became a species, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's part of
exactly.
what comes with our, I think, our reasoning and our thinking and all that kind of thing. So I find it very intriguing that we haven't really recognized more of that in a way, right? Like,
I
it's like,
think it's becoming more and more
I agree with
relevant.
you. I think we are figuring out ways to, as we become, I'll say, more familiar. One of the things that I recently, do you know the name Gabor Mate?
Repeat that?
I think it's Gabor Mate. He
No,
he he wrote a book, I think, called The Myth of Normal. And
no.
one of his concepts was around the medical world, and I kind of feel this even from the science world, but to deal with people medically as part of our healthcare system and exclude their emotion is missing an enormous part of
Ouch.
the diagnosis.
Ouch.
Like when I hear
Yeah.
this, like, but it's kind of true, right? We're very, very good at the scientific, the material part of what. That's why I mentioned a broken leg, but there's a connection that goes with that, right? You often hear about, oh, that doctor had good bedside manner or didn't have bedside manner, and it's like, that's the emotional part, right? Like, it's like,
Mm.
yeah, and
Makes such a huge difference too.
well, it's weird that we haven't had ways to recognize it in a more scientific way. I think we're definitely coming into it, but I think we're, like anything new, we bounce back and forth between what's useful and what's not useful, so to speak.
It's, what's funny what you're talking about, because again we'll segue. I'm just like going back to how people come past the table who don't know you from
Yes,
Adam,
yes,
right, head down,
yep,
and all of a sudden they see and they come back, and within 2 minutes they're crying, right? They don't know who I am. And it's that people are really, their emotions are
yes,
right there in
uh,
front of them, and I
yep.
see that all the time. And I do understand exactly what you're saying on a very fundamental level, but it's true.
Well, it's funny because a lot of time our real emotions we're embarrassed by,
I
like
think
like
so. Yeah.
And it's like, and this is kind of what I was saying about even like how the podcast works to me is in this long format and having these chats, we reveal things about ourselves that are who we really are, not necessarily who we're trying to project we are. And we
That's
have this
right. Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
that it's like, I can remember, like, that's why I think teenage years are just the most brutal in life because all you're trying to do is fit in, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's like whether
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
clothes, whether
Yeah. I
it's just,
know. So
and I think
important.
it's very different between boys and women and men
Yes.
as well, right?
Huge. Yeah.
And it's just like, and often think is like we're all kind of reflecting on ourselves, like the selfie as an example, right? How like when I grew up, to look at yourself in the mirror and admit it would like
Mm,
that's nuts. Now we're spending time in the park getting the right angle of what we
trying
look
to get
like.
yourself trying to take a picture. Back in the day, it was a sin. I mean, you were a little not a nice person if you were looking at yourself. Good
And
Lord.
the interesting part to me is the fact that like we're like, oh, what are they saying about me? And they're saying the same thing about you as you walk by. And I think we'd be devastated if we really knew how little people were actually thinking
I was
about.
just going to say, they don't realize, but they don't care. It takes a while to figure that out, actually. But when
it's
you
it,
do, it gives you a bit of freedom because they
it
really
does.
don't care.
And it's kind of amazing to me that
Yeah, it is.
it's still kind of like that. And
Funny.
I do think our social media world actually accentuates it.
Yeah, it's
It
created a
breeds it.
lot of problems, but
Oh
that's a whole
no,
other story.
a whole other story kind of thing. But
Yeah,
like, so before we get going on another thing, let's go and do the story. Let's you were saying about you know what you would like to read. So
I
why
think
don't we
so. I
do
think
that?
it's relevant. It's called Weeping Window, and thank you. I appreciate you giving me this
This
time.
is cool. This is very cool.
This is so all my little stories do have a photograph with them, and this one you won't really see very well, but once I start reading it, you'll understand. Can you see that? It's a
Yep, I can
very
see it. Yep.
not a great picture,
Yes.
but
Yep. Okay.
but and I will show you another one in a minute.
Did
Okay,
you do the artwork?
that's a photograph.
Oh, it is. Okay.
I
Okay.
chose all the most of the stories have a wonderful little
Okay.
photograph of
Cool.
them, so it gives a nice visual, as well. I think that for me it helps with the little story. So, Weeping Window is self-explanatory, really. It's not short, but it's relevant, and I'll read it as quick as I can.
Okay.
It's only 2 pages long. So, in Flanders fields the poppies blow, John McCrae. So that's the little
Hmm.
888,246 English lives were lost, and many more wounded during World War One. In the summer of 2014, I visited England. The world was preparing to recognise and acknowledge the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War One. Towards the end of our visit, my husband and I, Gary, enjoyed spending Father's Day weekend with my younger brother, Paul, and his family. We shared great food, wine, music, memories, and stories about our fathers. We discussed dads, granddads, and their courage, their sacrifice before, during, and after the First and Second World Wars. Eventually, our conversations and thoughts moved to the Weeping Window display at the Tower of London. The display consisted of 888,246 ceramic poppies, each one meticulously handmade, and every precious petal was made with respect, reflecting the memory of our fallen fathers, sons, brothers, uncles, cousins, loved ones, and all others who served, remembering the blood spilt on the battlefields and in the trenches, lost souls, and the boys who never came home. The Weeping Window display commemorated World War One's centennial, and each of the poppies was sold online The proceeds were distributed amongst the various charities supporting the veterans and their families, and within hours all poppies were sold out. The image of the 888,246 poppies evokes overwhelming sorrow as I think on the individual life lost, mostly male, and consider how blessed I am to live in a time of peace and harmony. Because of the sacrifice made, this image is one that can't help but reach out and touch each of us. Towards the end of our Father's Day celebration, my brother presented me with one of these ceramic poppies from the Tower of London. I wept tears of every emotion. When others look at my poppy, they will experience the same feeling. Therefore, this gift will continue to reach out and touch many for generations. I pay homage to those who sacrifice all so that we may have the freedom to choose, the ability to laugh and cry, live, love, grow, and learn to live together in peace. As the author of the poem in Flanders Fields, John McCrae, called Guelph Home, Guelph in Ontario Home. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. John McCrae. So
Wow.
I do have that copy, but there's the little picture of it.
Oh,
And
how
it's I have it here on a stand. So I have one of those copies that was I don't know if you remember the display, but it was magnificent. It was done outside Windsor Castle, and the Queen walked through all the poppies, Queen Elizabeth, and they spilt from the window, which is why they called it Weeping Window. So that's just I thought just a very little sample
oh,
of
that was
it's unique,
beautiful.
isn't it?
I think the fact that you repeated this 888,000 number is the like really gives you a sense of like we just don't even hear numbers like that anymore, right? Like it's just the magnitude of
Yeah,
what this cost in human sacrifice, human
sacrifice.
life,
Yeah.
right? So was it
If you
you
get a
surprised by
chance,
your what's that?
sorry, if you get a chance after the podcast, Google Weeping Window, and you'll see it in color. You'll
Well,
see
this as
all the
soon as
poppies.
you started to talk about it, I'm kind of going, I've seen this. I know that
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about, but I didn't know. So were you surprised when your brother brought you this
Oh gosh,
ceramic?
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. He'd gone online and he got one for each of his kids and one
Oh
for me.
wow,
And or he's anyway, he got one, maybe his wife and daughter. No, I think it was each of his kids and one for me. And this was the gift. It was the year I was 60, actually, so it was a birthday. It was a 60th birthday present. But he made a stand for it, and
oh,
I actually have it in the next room. But I guess I can't leave and come back. So
that is very cool. That
it
is
is.
like
It is. It's beautiful. But again, it's pulling that one. It's that grassroots story. So we
yes.
pull one poppy out and show you that one life, but you put them all together. It's very profound. Just seemed
So
a very relevant story to share.
so you saw this weeping window in person.
Yes.
Like, was it overwhelming to look at?
Oh gosh, it's horrendously overwhelming. You just couldn't. Yeah, it's very, very, very moving.
Because like I've seen pictures of it, which is amazing.
Yeah,
But when you
it's
hear
moving.
888,000,
Yeah,
like that's a stunning piece of work. Like
that's just England. That was just England because it was, but the world kind of recognized the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War One.
right.
And that's just, when we think about it again, it's just one little, we say that number, but think of all the other countries.
So I we got I think I kind of interrupted you, but you were talking about the work on your new book.
Yes.
and you were saying about the research that you were going through, and I kind of interrupted you by talking about how the media makes us think one thing, but
Yes,
when we're
yes,
boots on the ground is my term. Um, it's different, and you sound like what you were starting to describe. That's what I want to kind of go back to, because I thought it was really interesting how you were kind of doing the research and what you're finding out when you do it. Because I don't think when you started this, it was what you're at now.
definitely wasn't. No, it's a whole. I mean, the novel is there in the story because we need to, you know, as well as I do. You need to create a tapestry so people want to kind of get involved. They don't just
Right.
want to hear stats and numbers. But as I've done my research and and listened and read some of the accounts, so I've been reading stories by journalists from going over there after or during
Okay.
to Ireland. It's especially the places that were badly hit, the southern. First one was weather that caused the problem, but the second one was the potato crop, that everybody knows about. But and a lot of people don't really know about the first one.
No,
It
like
was over a million died, yeah. So it's 100 years before the second one. So that intrigued me too. I thought, we don't know this. We don't know enough about this, and so
no,
I'm
we don't.
following, what I've done is read and researched, and I'm using characters that I know and putting them, in a situation 100 years before, and creating someone you're going to get very attached to, right?
Interesting.
Or
Interesting.
what is, sorry, the
So
reader.
when you say 100, like what time period is this? Like when you go into
So the first one was 1780. I should know this better, forgive me, but the first one was 1780 something, and the second
okay,
one was 1870. So it's like 100 years between the two. 1875, the second one. The first one was maybe 1785. So there's apparently about
wow,
100 years between them. So I'm not spending a lot of time within the first one, but I have talked and discussed it because, I really didn't know about it. The second one is the one we all know. Well, there was an Irish famine because, the potatoes were off. But when you go into a hovel, which they call the houses, and,
mm,
you know, get introduced to these people who live in it,
mm.
and become immersed and involved in their survival, it becomes quite unbelievable,
Oh
really.
yeah,
I've actually had quite a difficult time with parts of it because, I've had
from
to
an
kind of go
emotional
away and
perspective, you
read
mean?
it.
Oh
But I'm
wow.
going to write it down. I'm not
So
going to
when
do it.
when you put your mind to deciding to write Amelia's prayer, did you have any idea this was going to come out of it? Like that you would be
Oh
of
no, not really. No, this was more about people saying, "Are you going to write? Are you going to keep writing about this family?" So I've got Amelia's Prayer, then I've got Amazing Grace, which is a kind of continuation,
Mhm.
and book with book clubs and things. Well, are you doing another one? What happens? Want to know, but I thought what I would like to do if people do want more was go prequel instead of. I
Right,
may still do another sequel. I don't know, but this is what's in my head and in my heart right now. So this is what I need to write.
right, and it makes sense to me. Like because when you start going into that historical part, like what started the moment you're writing about, where did that come from? And we tend to want to, I think we tend to want to know where those things
Yes,
are coming from, right? Like where
yes,
did they
yes,
start? How did they come together? What were we
yes.
looking at? And it's neat how you've been able to bridge that, because I was wondering, like with Amelia's prayer, had you thought you wanted to do more beyond that, or were you, like you're just glad to get the first book done?
Exactly. You've just said it all. You
Well,
know.
I remember when I was doing writing The Actor, right? And I was working with an editor kind of consultant person, and I had said that, well, what I want to do with the second book is I want to, and he said, what makes you think there's going to be a second book? And it was one of the best pieces of advice I ever
Yes,
got,
I
was
know.
like,
Yeah.
focus on, like, get the one done.
Because
That's
yeah,
why.
you do. It's so smart. That's such a anybody watching this who's interested in it. So true. Just focus on what you're doing in the moment because it's pretty amazing. I can say it to you. It's amazing to have one book written
Oh,
because I know what you've
well,
put into it,
well,
and
it's
how everybody thinks, oh yeah, you could write a book. I could write a book, and I think, well, okay,
I do, as you find out in the book vents, everyone has a story. Like, I
yes,
think
they
that
do.
part is a really kind of cool. It's what
Yes,
makes us human. But I remember, I think I was actually in the Indigo bookstore doing this event when a gentleman said, he says, my wife's writing a book. Do you have any words of encouragement or kind of advice? And mine almost always is finish.
yeah.
like,
Don't give up.
like get the
Keep
whole thing written down,
writing.
right?
Yeah,
It's like, and you got your beginning, you got your middle, you got your end, finish it. And he looked at me and he goes, that's really funny. And I go, why?
it's
He says,
true.
well,
Don't
I'm
stop. Don't stop because there
oh
are moments where you think, what am I doing?
and it's easy. Self-doubt is a pretty powerful, shall we say, anti-finished feeling that you get when you're working on it. And I kind of stole that from Neil Gaiman, the author Neil Gaiman, because I think that's one of the things he's always commented on. But the gentleman I was talking to, he smiled and he says, I renovate houses. And I said, oh, really? And he says, yeah. And he says, that's so apropos what you're saying, because I get so many calls to come in. People have done all their work in their house, but they haven't put the baseboards and the molding down.
Yeah,
They haven't finished. And he says, I he says, a lot of my work comes to finish what they started.
yeah. Because
And
the
I thought, well,
calm.
that's kind of
Yeah,
interesting. We have that.
that's what worked for him. It resonated very much with him. Yeah,
It crosses different boundaries for sure. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure we get clear about, because I'm trying to figure out timing on this, but you said Indigo, not Guelph, but you're going to be
oh,
November 30th. You're going to be at
I'm
Indigo
in
Milton.
Milton on the 30th, and
Okay.
the weekend before I'm in Indigo Burlington,
Right. Okay.
Burlington Mall, the 23rd, 24th, and this weekend I'm in Grant Street, and
Yes.
you would know all these because you've done them all, haven't you?
Well,
Yeah.
that I was going to say, before I left Ontario, Burlington was a pretty new store because they had moved
Yes,
from their
yeah, it's a
previous
good one.
location, right?
It's a good one. It's not as easy to get them as it used to be, but because I've been on the track for quite a while, I am, it's really hard to get book events now at Indigo, although they are trying to support local authors more since
Right.
Heather's back. But it's still a bit of a difficult. It's very, very difficult
Well,
to.
I think it's also very difficult. I mean, you're kind of in a point, like, I call you kind of a pro. You know kind of what you're doing and what's got to be done.
Yeah.
But it does take you a while to learn that.
Yes, it
And
does. And it changes all the time.
I also think many don't know that, like, as far as what that kind of thing is. I mean, you get out and you do one or two and you're done. I mean,
Yeah,
you've done, like, how many, do you know how many you've done?
not really. We slowed up because COVID
Yes.
stopped it dead in its tracks for 2 years. And truly, I mean, although we are doing them, it's been a pretty painful comeback
Yeah.
from COVID. I mean, I'm not complaining. People have lost whole
Oh,
businesses, lives, but we're talking about books and book events, and it's just maybe the back end of this year starting to pick up a little bit. But I don't know if I believe it's COVID because before COVID, it was a lot different.
Right.
The sales were a lot different. But I think the after COVID is also because people discovered Amazon. And you've
I,
just said, I say, give you a book's name, and you go, oh, yeah, okay, and tomorrow it's at the door, maybe even tonight.
the same day service is becoming astounding to me. Like it's just and you kind of in your
Yeah.
head you know what has to happen in order for that to go. It's not necessarily a
And
pretty picture, but
it's not.
you're getting your thing literally. You order it in the morning, it comes in the evening.
Yeah, sure. You
I
have
mean,
to make sure that you are available on Amazon.
I
But the book events, which used to be to get your story out there, is
yes.
certainly not about selling books. It's about people stopping and looking at your picture and wanting to know what's going on.
I think that's a great thing to actually to say to like especially people who are actually looking at doing that is that you got to look at the full picture here. I think many are into the idea, well, I'm going to sell a lot of books, and I mean that is a part of it, but it's only a part of it. Like to your point, you're out there getting stuff out in front of it's that marketing thing, right? Trying to get exposure to what your art is and trying to show that. I don't know that people really like comprehend how devastating the pandemic was to the entertainment industry. I mean, like I said, we were big movie fans, and I can't tell you still how many times we go to the movies and the theaters are all but empty. Like
Empty.
I just don't know how that works, and I
Yeah.
think part of it, like the streaming part, has kept people home. Like, look, why would I go out when I can
Yes.
sit and
Yeah.
watch of it? Because and a
Yeah.
lot of Hollywood has gone to the streaming services, even with new movies. But I think you also mentioned like not having to go out to get the book you read because Amazon brings it to your door. And I don't think that's something that Amazon had, like that was a picture that they were thinking of at all.
Not at the time. No, I don't think so. I think it's purely by kind of what you'd say default, I suppose. It's like so many things have happened. Like, as I was driving somewhere to do, just to your point, through town, and I looked at the GO station past the GO, Milton GO, and the car park was just not full. So
Oh, really?
it used to be full to
Bam,
overflowing. You
jammed.
couldn't get parked. But people are at home working remotely,
Well, I
like
think
we
it
are.
it definitely made impression. Like this is where I'm hoping to like we're now video. Like well, eventually, I would like to have a studio and have people here. Like I think that would be the kind of fun part.
That sounds cool.
Because
Yeah.
getting to shake a person's hand and really meet them in person,
I've
that's
never
more
been
of
out west yet, so
there you go. There you go. Maybe. I was going to say you never know kind of what's going to be behind the corner. That's for sure. What I was going to say is we've talked a lot of branches, and one of the things that I wanted to kind of address that we talked about a lot the last time is you mentioned a silent retreat that you went on,
yes.
and I want to talk a little bit about. Did you do that before Catch Your Falling Star came out?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Doug?
Did you do your silent retreat prior to the Falling Star coming out?
Yes. Yes, I did.
So was it part of you writing that book?
Um, Actually, no, because I'll tell you
So
exactly.
I should
No, it
probably
wasn't.
prompt this a little bit. Sorry, I'm
Okay,
interrupting you,
go
but
ahead. No,
I
go ahead.
said where you did your silent retreat. Like, kind of, can you say like where you were in Alabama? I think, right?
No, Kentucky.
Kentucky,
Yeah,
Kentucky. Yes,
Kentucky. Yeah,
it
Bardstown, Kentucky.
it was Thomas Merton.
It's
His
the Gethsemane Monastery. It's a monastery of Gethsemane. It's called, and
okay,
it's certainly Thomas Merton. Probably was the famous Trappist monk and philosopher who's buried there. He's actually buried there, but he spent many years there, and that's what it's well known for.
did he write a lot of his books there too?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he's
Okay,
got,
okay.
and they have a bookstore with all of his books. You know, you can. It's very much, obviously, very much Thomas Merton. All over the place are his quotes and sayings, and they're on the tables while you're eating or in your little room. Yeah,
Well, you
very.
were like a very big proponent of it. Were encouraging me to go and do it. And my question now is: so it wasn't part of writing Catch a Falling Star. Has it affected you in the sense of what you write about or what you would write, or impact on your writing?
It's affected me in that it would impact my writing because I took myself away from the noise and the
Mm.
hustle and the bustle and the life, that we all get caught up in very quickly.
Yes.
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it affected me in understanding how I need to take myself away more often and do something similar,
Have you
if
done
not.
another one?
I have. I've done
Oh
another
wow.
one. Now, not there. I did another one in Niagara Falls, and it was a guided one, and it was in the Carmelite, no, St. Teresa of the Roses convent, and it was a 3 day guided retreat, and it was called Stop and Smell the Roses. So
Oh wow.
it was a retreat about being quite in the moment, right? Not
Ah,
over
okay.
here or over there, but right here with you now in the moment, which I find very difficult to do, which is why I thought, well, I should go do this. And
So he see every time you come down, you prompt me with other things that are
that's
fascinating.
okay,
So
I'm listening.
I've repeated this numerous times in this podcast, but I've become very fascinated by Lewis's The Screw Tape Letters.
Yeah,
It's become, I would say, one of my favorite books. I'm not sure I entirely still understand it. The depth, I'm blown away by what he captures in this book.
yeah,
And as soon as you mentioned what your most recent silent retreat was about being in the moment, he talks about this in so like the screw tape is written from the demon's perspective, right?
hmm,
Which makes it so interesting when you're reading it because you constantly have to remember, like, you'll read something, oh, that makes sense. Well, no, it doesn't actually make sense. And then you remember that, oh, it's the demon speaking here. It's not like God or the right truth, so to speak. And he talks about in this is the demon speaking, and the enemy in it is God. So it's always the reverse, right? And
yeah,
he
of
talks
course.
about humans like to be in three times. There's the past, there's the present, and there's the future. And we want them, so this is the demon world. We want them in the past because that's where it's already done and they can think about that of what they didn't do right. And we want them in the future because they're going to worry all the time in the future. But where the enemy, God in this case, wants them is in the present because
Hmm.
it's the closest he gets to be in eternity and with him. And that's the brilliance that I'm talking about from Lewis. Like, I just like who puts things in that kind of perspective.
Hmm.
And to your point of how hard it is, like we're kind of raised to be in the future in
I
many
know in the
ways.
past, and yeah, and running through the present, just missing it all the time. Yeah.
It's just like I it was kind of a profound reading moment for me because it just kind of put in a nutshell how kind of in a way messed up we are because we
Yes.
spend so much of our time thinking and worrying
causes
about the
causes so
future.
much
Oh
anxiety
my
and
goodness, man.
undue stress and wasted time, and and still you go away and do all these things and come back and do the same thing.
Yes.
However, awareness is the key. So
So
becoming aware.
did when you went to this place in Niagara in the Lake,
Falls.
Niagara Falls, and
Mhm.
they said stop and smell the roses, has it helped?
Well, I got it did help. I think maybe not specifically that what I did find, it was good. I loved it, the whole idea of just being away and quiet. And although this was guided, remember the last one we did, I told you I didn't speak to
Yes.
anybody
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
5 days. This we did. People sat next to you and chatted, and we talked because we had meditation. And actually, it's interesting. They had a Thomas Merton room there. Isn't that
Oh,
interesting? And we
yeah.
went. They
Really.
had quotes about him, and they did different meditations, and teaching you how to kind of stay in the moment and stop yourself from going other places. And in itself, I enjoyed it. However, given the choice, I would definitely do a silent one again next
Oh, you
time.
prefer that?
Definitely, because I just heard myself better, or
Okay.
became aware of myself better because of the silence. You've got to stay, you will. It's a bit like meditating. You think, oh, you think, well, you think of your word, and then I'm thinking, did I switch that over now? Or, I wonder if, but you have to teach yourself to
Yes.
stay right in the moment. And within the silence, the discipline of that silence
Mm,
just made you think differently, and
yeah.
made you definitely feel differently.
Oh, I'll bet. I'll bet.
Because we don't do that. I mean, I didn't talk on the phone. I talked to my husband twice just to see that he was okay. And
Yes.
it was like, and you couldn't have, they take away all of that. There's a 1 hour a night you're allowed to actually use, not for an hour, but there's between
Yes.
7 and 8. It's available should you need it, because, they
Okay.
realize people have a life out there. But I said to my husband, don't talk to me. I don't want to be disturbed. Like, if you're okay, that's fine.
Yes.
I'm not going to get into anything that I'm doing. Sort of nicely leave me alone, because I want to be in peace here. I would
Interesting.
recommend it to anybody. I mean, some people they're in horror, could not do that. I couldn't be quiet for 5 days. I mean, I'm a storyteller and a talker.
Yeah. I was going to
But
say, like, you would have
it,
those challenges like anybody else would,
it
right?
was amazing. Yeah.
Well, since that, my wife did go on one. I haven't
Oh,
got there yet.
oh,
She
you
went
haven't
on.
yet.
Yeah,
Where
she
did she
went
go?
one
Did she?
uh, on the Sunshine Coast. That was like on Vancouver Island,
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
and I think it was
Silent or
four
guided?
silent. I think it was 4 days, and one of the things that she found out was a prayer methodology that she's kind of adopted. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, okay, this is kind of cool too. So
You'll learn something.
yes, I was going to say she will do it again for sure. Like she
Yeah.
really likes. She's a big hiker, so she does like the solitude, and she doesn't
Yeah, that's
mind
nice. And
doing
usually
it.
these things are around beautiful places. I mean, you
And
just,
that, she
just
loves that, and
yeah.
so that's a really big part of it. So it's interesting. I wanted to get a recap to see where that kind of was, because in the last time we talked, that was pretty important to yourself, and I have since gotten a couple of Thomas Merton's books. Um, Unfortunately, I'm not proud of this, but I haven't read them yet.
That's okay. They're not the sort of thing you really sit down and read. You look up them and
Yes,
moments.
yes.
I
There's things
I
that you kind
think
of
you
get out of
would
them.
like. I honestly think you would love going to Gethsemane. I think if you're going to
I'll
do
bet.
one, I don't know. I guess you're a good way from out west, but I don't know. You could probably fly there. That's a long. I drove from here. It wasn't. I mean, I
Oh,
just
you
jumped,
drove down.
drove there and back.
Oh
Yeah,
wow. Oh wow. That's
bit
that.
more
That's
silence.
so. I was going to say, I've taken a lot of time from you again today. It's been spectacular, as it was the last time too.
Oh,
I
it's
find
been
you just
lovely.
you're. It's so interesting talking and getting your perspective on a number of things. Is there anything you'd like to kind of end with in particular? Any comments or anything that you would like to?
Well, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. I always love to hear how you're getting on. And as I've told you before, when we were first starting out as authors, we both went with the same
Yes, yes.
self-publishing company, and they used to talk to me about you, and I would think, wow, and they'd say, oh, he's done this and doing that, and always you were sort of a couple of years ahead of me, and I'd think, well, he's done so many book events, and so I always looked to
Oh, thank
you
you.
as inspiration. And also, you're so talented, your
Oh,
engineering and your
thank you.
music and your ability to do this. I actually think how you manage to sit down and get someone to talk to you for hours amazes me. And I appreciate it. I really love it. And I wasn't sure today. I thought, now this is going to be different because I told you at the beginning I'm a fidgeter and a fiddler, and you don't edit it. I thought, oh man.
Well, I was going to say, like, we've gone another, again, well over an hour. And
It was great. It was really, really great, and I loved it. And I am quite honoured to have had
oh,
this 2 hours with you.
the honor's mine, Christiane. I'm kind of blown away by what you've been able to capture and like your storytelling. You get to read the book, The Weeping Window, the story, The Weeping Window. Is that?
Yeah, just Google it. Yeah, or if you're
And,
going to read or Falling Star, that's just one of the Catch Your Falling Star. Sorry, it's one of the little stories in there.
and I just thought you reading that today, like kind of like on the spur of the moment, you just were very, very able to do that. And I thought, like, that's kind of really cool. That's why it's fun to talk to you on this in this
Oh,
format.
good.
So before we go, how do people want if they want to know more about you? You've got a website.
Yes, I do. It is Christiane at christianebanks.com.
So we'll put that actually in the header for this when
Yeah,
the podcast comes out.
Christiane, and www.christianebanks.com. So I have www.christianebanks.com. And also, if you Google Christiane at
Yes,
christianebanks.com, it'll get you to everything you need.
beautiful. You're on Instagram,
I am, yes.
and are you on Facebook as well?
Yes, I am.
And any of the other social media platforms?
No, that's it right now.
Okay. And so, listening, thanks again for joining us today. Really get out. So, Christiane's going to be at, and I'm trying to get this right, but you're doing the 30th of November, which is going to be probably a few days from when this broadcasts. She's going to be at
Good.
Indigo Milton Saturday on Saturday, November 30th. And you're going to be going to places in December too, correct?
No, Indigo doesn't take book
Oh,
events
right, right,
December
right.
anymore. No, not Indigo. I may be doing some private,
Right.
institutions, but not Indigo.
You were doing some in Florida at one time
Yes, I did.
too.
I actually did Barnes and Noble in January.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Will
I
you be
hope
doing
to
that
try
again?
and do a December tour. That was a plan, but it didn't pan out just for
Ah, okay.
various different reasons. But maybe next year.
Now that's very, very cool to
Yeah.
me. So remember Christiane's books. Christiane Banks, author Christiane Banks. She has a book called Amelia's Prayer. She has a book which is the sequel to that book is Amazing Grace. And she has this, I'll say, somewhat unique and sounds very entertaining book called Catch Your Falling Star, which she read from today. So I'm very excited for you, Christiane, and your future with the new book that you're doing as a prequel to Amelia's Prayer. Sounds like it'll be very cool. Anyway, I hope we can do this again.
Me
And
too. Yeah.
it's been wonderful having you as a guest. But I'm going to let you go now. And thank you for listening to Better Than Not. And I hope you'll tune in again. Bye for now.
Thank
Bye,
you, Doug.
Christy.
Thanks for everything. Bye bye.
Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.